What's up, everyone? Welcome to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about the final meta in Warzone. Just focusing on long-range weapons today. I'm literally going to cover all the top weapons in the entire game and try to get you guys what the top weapons are and some recommended loadouts. As always, if you like the content, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to help support this video and help push the channel a little bit more, be sure to like the video and drop a comment. But let's jump straight into it and we'll start talking about the final Warzone 1 meta. Before I jump into this, I want to explain what all these different columns mean. So obviously in the F column here, we have the weapon itself. The G column is basically the score for the long range meta out of 10. So the bar got a 4 out of 10 for its score, for the meta score. Accuracy, so this is a subjective thing. This is, I loaded into plunder matches with all of these weapons with a meta loadout, like all the attachments that I would want to use. And then I basically shot into a window that was like 75 meters away and kind of compared all the different weapons. It's not like I actually know that I only hit 40% of my shots at that distance. But I basically just use this number as a rough estimate to compare to the other different weapons. So it's more of a real feel for how accurate I am with these things. Next up, we have the close range TTK. So most of the ARs have just one damage drop off. So there's one TTK close and then one TTK far. And then the range is where that one drop off occurs. And then weighted average time to kill is basically weighting the distance from 20 up to 100 meters, because that's where you're usually going to be using these weapons. Weighting these different TTKs with their range and the long TTK and getting just one number for basically how well it performs across 20 to 100 meters. So it includes the help that a really good close range TTK would give you, and it'll include the negative that a long range TTK will give you. It's just one good number to judge like the down potential of any of these given weapons from 20 out to 100 meters. Bullet velocity, self-explanatory, just the bullet velocity of the weapon with its meta build. And then notes, just personal notes about what I think about the weapon. I'm going to start at the bottom of the list and just work my way up to the top. So first up, we have the bar. This is a Vanguard gun. Used to be really good with the 40 round mag, the 40 round Caldera mag, but they've hit it with some pretty bad nerfs, and the recoil is just too bad to be usable at all right now. Next up, we have the AK-74U. Now, obviously in Warzone 1, it's not an AR, but I included it just because I was curious how it would fit in. It does have higher bullet velocity than other SMGs. It has good close TTK, so I included it, but even with those factors, it still doesn't really fit into the long-range meta at all. Next up is the MG82. So this was a meta, definitely, during Black Ops Cold War. This was one of the best guns for a long time. You can see it has just phenomenal close TTK, really good long TTK, and then the weighted average TTK is amazing as well. 751 milliseconds is crazy, pretty short range, but the problem that it has is it's not accurate enough for a long range weapon. For Caldera or really even the small map, there's just too many things holding it back for both those things. But yeah, it's decent, but it's just not going to compete just because you can't hit all your shots. Next up is the Modern Warfare M91. So this is pretty much just a worse Bruin. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it. Is it's basically the same gun as the Bruin, just worse. All right, C58 is next up. C58 was meta for a long time, but it's been pretty badly nerfed in terms of recoil. Still has decent time to kill, a pretty decent weighted average time to kill, but it's just the accuracy just holds it back. AS44 is a pretty decent gun for close range engagements. Still has a phenomenal close TTK, phenomenal long range TTK as well, but it has lower bullet velocity. And it's really inaccurate. So a combination of bad recoil and low bullet velocity means that you're really not going to be hitting any of your shots at range. And this is a long range meta video, so it's not a very good weapon for long range. Next up is the EM2. So the EM2 got a pretty big buff in this Season 5 mid-season patch. But still, the vertical recoil that this thing has is just too much. It's really, really hard for me to control on mouse and key out past about 50 meters. It is very consistent though, so I don't really know how this would play into controller recoil control, but at least for mouse and key, it's just too much. I just can't pull my mouse down enough for long enough to get the downs at longer ranges, so that's really what holds it back. Next up, we have the Odin. The Odin got a little bit of a buff in this patch as well. Has really good close TTK, insane amount of range, insane bullet velocity, really good weighted average TTK because that close TTK extends out so far. But for me, I just can't hit my shots with this thing. I've been trying to make the Odin work basically since I started playing Warzone. It's a Modern Warfare weapon, so it's been in the game since the start. And on paper, it always looks amazing, but then in practice, it never works. I've never been able to make it work. I think the issue that it has is that the recoil, even though it doesn't have that much recoil, the recoil seems to be pretty inconsistent. So from one recoil pattern to the next, I think the angles change slightly. So it's like you can't learn that. That's not something you can really learn and get used to. So for me, it's just never worked. Next up is the SA87. Still a 6 out of 10. It's a little more accurate for me than the Odin. Has really good time to kill, really good bullet velocity. But there's just a lot of better options, so that it doesn't stand out really in any way to me. Just because that low accuracy makes it harder to hit those shots at range, despite having good time to kill, good range. Next up's the Nikita. So this is a gun that a lot of people really, really love. Has great close range TTK, 632 milliseconds, and really long range, 44 meters of range for that first drop off. Decent long range TTK. Weighted average time to kill obviously is really good because of those two numbers. Decent bullet velocity. But for me, on Caldera, the recoil is just too bad. It's like a zigzag pattern, so it kind of zigzags as it goes up. And that's really, really hard to learn and difficult to use at anything past, 50, 60 meters. So that's why I really don't think it competes in terms of long range meta on Caldera. Smaller maps, definitely. It's definitely a very, very good weapon for smaller maps, but the long range engagements, it just doesn't work so well on Caldera. DP27 basically is a little bit more accurate than like a Nikita, but it has worse time to kill. Obviously, it's an LMG, so it has really bad mobility, really bad ADS times, things like that. It's just kind of meh all around. It doesn't really stand out to me in any way. Next up in the 7s, we have the XM4. Some people have been saying that this is pretty close to meta. I don't really think that it is. It's just hard to control the recoil. Close TTK is not phenomenal. It's pretty good, not phenomenal. Short range. The long TTK is pretty good, so it has a decent weighted average time to kill. But really, just the accuracy for me. If I can't hit my shots with sustained fire at longer ranges on Caldera, it's just not going to be a good weapon. So that's why the XM4 is lower down for me at a 7 out of 10. Next up, we got the Vargo S. This was introduced just a few patches ago. It's a pretty new gun. I gave it a 7 out of 10. It's a little more accurate for me than the XM4. A little bit worse TTK with really long damage range, 50 meters. Then it has really bad long range TTK for a pretty bad weighted average time to kill from 20 to 100 at almost 900 milliseconds. And it has lower bullet velocity. So combination of like how many shots you can put on a target and the bullet velocity really determines how you're gonna be able to hit people while they're moving. So those two things combined, I don't think it's really competitive for long range. Next up, we have the Cold War AUG. The Cold War AUG and the M16 both are pretty decent right now, but they're just kind of tricky to use. So I gave it a good accuracy score because I've spent a lot of time using these burst guns and I can hit some shots, but you'll notice it has really terrible bullet velocity. So that, on top of not being one of those new like auto burst weapons where you can just hold the trigger down and it keeps firing bursts over and over, it's really just not easy to use, and I don't think for most people it's going to be applicable. But you can get some pretty decent time to kill at range, and they are pretty fun to use, but just really not competitive with the meta. Next up, we have the AMAX. AMAX is a huge fan favorite for everyone that's played this game forever. It was one of the favorite metas. I still don't think it really competes. The accuracy for me, first of all, I was never good at controlling the AMAX recoil. It was just not my gun. I loved things like the EM2, stuff like that. So it wasn't that it had a lot of recoil, just for some reason the pattern that the AMAX has just didn't fit with me. But it has pretty decent close range TTK, pretty good range, pretty good long TTK for an average weighted average TTK, and then pretty lower bullet velocity than some of the other options. It's decent. It's not great. It might be closer to like a 7.5 out of 10. I do think it's better than some of these other options, but also being a Modern Warfare gun, it's going to have slower mobility. I don't know. I don't really think it fits in the meta. Next up, we have the M16. It's literally the same gun as the Cold War AUG. It just has better accuracy for me. I just hit more shots with it. Everything else is identical. Bullet velocity, TTK, everything's basically exactly the same. So it's a little bit better than the AUG. It's like a 7.5 out of 10, but still not super competitive. Next up, AN94. AN94 for me is super accurate. It has basically no recoil. It has lower time to kill though, and this is including assuming that you hit all of those the hyper burst, so it shoots 3 bullets right at the start really fast, and then it goes to a lower RPM after that. So this 923 is even including that faster time to kill because of those first 3 shots hitting. So in practice, you're not always going to hit those, which means that the TTK is going to go up. So even though it's super accurate, it has good bullet velocity, it's just really not super competitive with some of the other options. QBZ got a little bit of a buff in this patch, so with that buff, it's a pretty accurate gun. It's like the first few shots have a lot of recoil, and after that, it's pretty easy to control. Long range, not very good close TTK, and a kind of average long TTK. good bullet velocity. It's actually a decent weapon. A lot of people have liked the QBZ in the past. It has a lot of visual recoil, and those first few shots make me miss. But after that, it's very controllable. So it's decent. It's not great. 7.5. It's the new highest scoring weapon for long range meta. All right, we're starting to get up to the higher scores now. So the Whitley is a pretty competitive weapon in the current meta. Has phenomenal close range TTK, good range, good long range TTK for one of the best weighted average time to kills we've seen so far. Lower accuracy though, so 45% accuracy for me. This is one that you could learn, I think. So it has a lot of recoil, but it's very consistent. The amount of recoil between each shot is consistent throughout as well. So it's something I think you could learn and would be a very good weapon to try to master. It has LMG mobility, obviously. With the 45 round mag, you have a little bit smaller mag capacity. So overall, decent weapon. Not the meta, but it is very good. I'm going to talk about all the 8s just to speed this video up. So we've got the Finn, M4, KGM40, Volk, Farah, and Whitley. I just went over the Whitley. The Finn is the opposite end of the spectrum, so it is pinpoint accurate. It's the lowest recoil in the game, in my opinion. I hit the most shots with it of anything, but it does have a little bit lower bullet velocity, so you're not going to hit quite so many shots. But you can see it has, I think, the worst weighted average time to kill of any weapon on this whole list. So at 1.1 second from 20 to 100 meters, really bad time to kill, but it makes up for that by just, you don't miss any shots with it. So it's a decent weapon, not meta, but relatively close. M4A1 got a buff in this patch. It's just not that accurate. It doesn't have the best close TTK. It's just kind of average everywhere. And I think that something like the Grau, the M13, is just going to be better. The Kilo is going to be better just because they have lower recoil, easy to control recoil with basically identical TTK and sometimes a little bit better time to kill. So even after the slight buff to neck damage, I don't think it's really a meta weapon. KGM40 is super accurate as well, just like the Finn. I think it's the second most accurate gun on this list. Has really bad time to kill again though, but it does have a little bit better bullet velocity. It's okay. It has it's almost like an LMG. Like it's really slow reload, really slow movement, really slow ADS. So I don't really think it fits into the meta anymore. The Volk is pretty good. It's a less accurate weapon. It got a little bit of a nerf to its ADS movement speed in this patch, but it has phenomenal close range TTK, not very long damage range, and then an okay long range TTK. So it's kind of it's a pretty fun gun. It has really good ADS movement speed, good mobility, but it does have a small magazine, only 45 rounds. And the accuracy is not great, so it's not going to be one of the best weapons for long range, but it is pretty okay. The Farah depends on the person. Some people can really control the recoil of the Farah well. It's kind of like S-shaped recoil, and I am not great at controlling that. So that's why it's one of the, it's an 8 out of 10 obviously, so it's still good, but it's not one of the best. Decent TTK, decent bullet velocity. It's just kind of an okay gun. On to the 9s. So these are 9 out of 10. These are basically meta weapons. They're 100% usable in any case. So the UGM Burst, extremely accurate weapon. Even after the nerfs to its recoil, it's still super accurate. It does have a non-competitive TTK up close, and that's the big thing that holds it back. Because sometimes you're going to have your AR out or your long-range weapon out, and someone's going to pop up 30 meters in front of you and having a good time to kill there, like this Bruin at 629 milliseconds. That's so much better than the UGM Burst at 951. So that's kind of what holds it back. If it didn't have that, I think it could be closer to the top. It also has very bad bullet velocity. I'm a big fan of the UGM Burst. Just I can hit my shots with it, so it's just really fun to use. Automaton got a little bit of a nerf in this patch, but it's still phenomenal, so still super accurate. TTKs are decent with it. It has lots of range, 47 meters out to the first drop. It has a worse than average on this list weighted average time to kill, and slightly worse than average bullet velocity, but it's just really good all around. It's just really easy to use. The recoil is consistent. The recoil is the same direction every single time. That's why it's one of the best. It's just because it's super easy to use. And then we got the Bruin. The Bruin basically has a phenomenal close range TTK, decent range, good long range TTK, leading to a really good weighted average. So 766. One of the best we've seen towards the top of the list because it's also pretty accurate, 60%. Not the easiest to control, but also not anywhere near the worst. So it's kind of just competitive mostly because of the really good time to kill, decent bullet velocity, and decent accuracy. Next up, we have the 9.5 out of 10. So I added some sub numbers. I used to just do 9, 10, but now I'm doing 9.5 because I think there's some that stand out in the middle. M13, phenomenal weapon. Grau, phenomenal weapon. Kilo, phenomenal weapon. They're all extremely similar. You can see I was the most accurate with the M13, followed by the Grau, followed by the Kilo, but that's going to be different for different people. The Kilo only has recoil in the first few shots, and after that, it basically has none. The Kilo does have the advantage of having slightly better time to kill up close. They all have basically 50 meters of range, but the Kilo is going to be a little worse time to kill out at range than like an M13, about 80 milliseconds slower, so that's a pretty big difference there. Weighted average time to kill, the M13 wins. They all have good bullet velocity. They're extremely similar weapons, so basically just pick whichever one you can hit the most shots with. That's going to be the deciding factor there. But I do think after all the recent changes, they are basically meta. So I think you can use them. They're going to have bad mobility. They're going to have really bad like ADS movement speed because of the Commando foregrip, but they're still phenomenal weapons. Then we also have the RPD at 9.5. So this is really, really accurate for me. Not great time to kill up close, but not awful. Extremely long damage range, so it holds that pretty decent close range TTK out to 60 meters, which means that it's going to be faster than something like the M13, Grau, and Kilo for about 10 meters of range there by about 100 milliseconds. So that's a pretty wide gap there. It's one of the longer damage ranges on this list, and it also has a pretty good TTK out at range, even past that 60 meters. Leading to a pretty good, slightly worse than the M13, but very close weighted average time to kill, slightly worse bullet velocity. Obviously, it's an LMG, so it moves a little bit slower. Reloads a little bit worse, but super accurate. It's just a really fun gun. It's one of my favorite guns to run right now for sure. On to the 10 out of 10. So we've got the STG-44, the Vargo, and the UGM. Basically, the STG is just a much better KGM-40. Super accurate. Good bullet velocity. The time to kills are bad, but it makes up for that in the fact that it has good mobility, good ADS time, ridiculously low recoil. It's just everything about it's just good except for the time to kill, which is still okay. It's not great, but the TTK is kind of eclipsed by the fact that you can hit all your shots. So even up close, if you mix in 1 or 2 headshots, it's really going to start having good time to kills. And that low recoil is just amazing for a long-range weapon. So I really think the STG is a phenomenal all-rounder right now. Just one of the absolute best. Next up, we've got the Vargo. So this gun has been really good for a while. It's been sneaking up as other things get nerfed. And now I think it's a 10 out of 10. So super accurate weapon. Has kind of S-shaped recoil, but not it's not awful. Good competitive average time to kill up close. Average damage range. Good TTK at range. So this is a better TTK than a lot of the other ones, leading to a really good weighted average of 817. It also has very high bullet velocity. Even after the nerfs to the UGM, I think it's a very competitive weapon. So 70% accuracy, it's pretty accurate. The first few shots are kind of rough, and then after that, it's very easy to hit your shots. To me, I still think there's some better options than this. Like, I still think the STG and the Vargo might work better for me in a lot of cases, but just this ridiculous 634 millisecond time to kill up close and then 761 at range leads to one of the absolute best weighted average time to kills in the whole list of weapons here, and the fact that it's still really accurate is why it's at the top of the list. It does have lower bullet velocity, but even though it's accurate in terms of recoil, hitting your shots at range isn't going to be quite as easy as something like a Vargo or an STG. All right, and then last up, I didn't scroll up far enough, but we got the Cooper Carbine. I think the Cooper Carbine could be widely considered the best weapon in the game right now. Let me explain why I think that is. Recoil-wise, for me, it's very similar to the UGM, only it's more accurate in those first few shots than the UGM for me. Maybe less accurate during sustained fire, but the first few shots are also very important. It also has the best time to kill of these top weapons except the UGM. The UGM beats it by about 80 milliseconds. It has a little bit shorter damage range, 31 meters, but it doesn't matter so much because it has this phenomenal 784 millisecond long-range TTK. So that leads to a really good weighted average of 775, second highest of these 10 out of 10 weapons, just behind the UGM. It also has low bullet velocity like the UGM, so it's very, very much basically an AR version of the UGM. So you have better reload time, way better mobility, better ADS time, similar recoil, similar time to kill. It's just a UGM, but smaller basically. It's lighter weight, better handling, and I really think that it's one of the absolute best weapons in the game right now. The only thing that holds it back is that bullet velocity, but I think the fact that it's just really good everywhere else, I think it makes up for that. All right, let's go through some recommended builds for these different weapons. So I went into a punter match and tested all of these just before this video and combined a bunch of different recoil attachments to see what really worked the best for each weapon individually. And this is what I came up with. So we're going to start with the Cooper Carbine. It's just a phenomenal weapon, like I was just talking about. It's so hard to beat right now in pretty much every way. MX Silencer, Cooper Custom Barrel, default there. There's not really much to say. 3 to 6x is my favorite optic. If you're on console, you could use the 2.5x or potentially even like a 1.5 or 1.75 to get similar amounts of zoom to a computer player. Cooper 45W, this is a sustained recoil stock. Just the best of all the recoil attachments. When combined with tight grip, it has basically no recoil at range. I did test this against hard scope and brace, and tight grip really just seems like it's the best still, even after all the nerfs it's gotten. Hatched grip and hand stop are very similar attachments. They both help with the vertical and horizontal recoil, and they don't hurt the weapon in any way really for long range. So that's why in a lot of the builds you're going to see a combination of those two attachments. 9mm 60 round drum, just kind of the best mag for this gun. The other ones give it a little bit too much recoil and then lengthen for bullet velocity. Onto the STG, so we've got the MX Silencer, the 760mm barrel, 3 to 6x optic. The weighted stock tends to just help the most with recoil, so that tends to be my favorite. If you wanted better strafe speeds, you could go with the Constance Tactical, but really the sustained recoil is the worst part of the STG's recoil, if you could even say it has a worst part. So generally we want to go with the weighted stock just because the Constance Tactical is not going to help with that sustained recoil at all. Hand stop just tends to be my favorite underbarrel for most weapons, especially if they don't have a whole lot of horizontal. Helps with the vertical and horizontal. 7.62 Gorenko 50 round mag, still the meta there. Lengthened, and then like I said, sustained recoil tends to be the problem with the STG from my testing. So polymer helps with that sustained recoil, and this just felt laser accurate to me throughout the whole recoil pattern. Perk 1, Perk 2, not a super important choice here. There's no tight grip or anything like that, so you can use whatever you want here. Acrobatic if you want to be more mobile, sleight of hand if you want to get that reload off quicker, focus for flinch resistance while you're being shot. Vital's going to increase your recoil, so I wouldn't probably recommend that, and same for perk 2. You can pick whatever you want there. So onto the Vargo 52. This is going to be the same build for pretty much all the Black Ops Cold War weapons with one exception. So we've got the Grew Suppressor or Agency Suppressor if it's that other category of weapon. Task Force Barrel, the last barrel. Axial Arms 3X, still the best optic. So something Sim discovered was that the Spetsnaz Speed Grip helps quite a bit more with horizontal than the Spetsnaz Grip for the Vargo specifically. So for this gun, we're going to use the Speed Grip, but for other Black Ops Cold War weapons, generally you're going to use the Spetsnaz Grip. And then the fourth magazine, the Spetsnaz 60 round, is going to be what you're going to go with for the Vargo. Fantastic weapon. Just great all around, basically zero visual recoil, so you can just absolutely beam people with this. As we're going through all these recommended loadouts, don't forget, if you like the channel, be sure to subscribe. We've got usually like 40% of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed. Doesn't take any time for you at all, doesn't hurt you at all, but it helps grow my channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Onto the UGM, this thing's still really good even after all the nerfs. Not a whole lot of change here in terms of build. We've got the MX Silencer like always. The Bernard XL214 barrel, 3 to 6x. The first stock helps with a sustained recoil, and then tight grip to stack on top of that sustained recoil. Strife angled grip seems to help the best with the visual recoil this thing has. It has quite a bit of shake and wobble. And that's really the big difference between like the 303 British 50 round fast mag and the 100 round box Sakura that we've been using forever is visual recoil. The actual recoil is about the same. But for some reason, the 50 round British fast mag has much more visual shake, and it makes it a lot harder to see your target and hit your target. Hatched grip, vertical and horizontal, just tends to be my favorite grip right now. And then perk 2, again, you can pick whatever you want there. So for the M13, standard Modern Warfare build for a long range weapon, monolithic suppressor, the longest barrel, whatever that might be. It's called different things for each gun, but in this case, it's the Tempest Marksman. VLK 3X, Commando 4-grip, 60 round mag. Standard build. It's going to be the same for the Kilo, same for the M13, same for the Grau, same for the M4. Really not a whole lot to talk about there. It's just the standard build we've used forever. Onto the RPD, we've got Grew Suppressor, Task Force Barrel, Axial 3X, Spetsnaz Grip, 120 round drum, or 120 round mag. So this is going to be a really slow ADSing gun and slow movement gun. Something I really like. This is the best for actual recoil. But a combo that I really like to use is the SUSAT multi-zoom. So this is 2 to 6x. So this is like slightly less zoom than the Axial Arms 3x. And then you can swap it to be like the Royal and Cross 6x whenever you need that. And then I take off the Spetsnaz grip. So this is going to have more actual recoil than that first build I showed, but it's going to have much better ADS time and less screen shake. So it's pretty comparable in my usage for both of those. They're both pretty good, but I prefer the low visual recoil, low screen shake that you get with the SUSAT. Next up, we've got the UGM burst. So MX silencer, UGM burst barrel. This is the burst barrel here. 3 to 6x optic still. Because it's a burst gun, we want that initial firing recoil, so we use the TAC-YR stock. This gives it really good ADS time, really good ADS movement speed, as well as the strife-angled 6.5 Sakura 100 round for the same reasons as the other UGM, where the 100 round gives much better visual recoil than the other options of the small caliber. Stippled grip, this helps with that initial firing recoil and recoil recovery, which are both super important for burst guns or semi-auto guns, and then brace, again, to help with that initial firing recoil. I tried this with Surveil, and brace just feels 10 times better. So the recoil really is helped by brace. So 100% recommend using brace. Perk 2, use whatever you want. This is a really good weapon. It's been kind of forgotten, but it's still very good for Caldera, the big map. Last up, we have the Automaton. So there's been a lot of talk about sustained fire, initial fire, recoil. Last up, we have the Automaton. There's been a lot of talk about sustained fire, initial fire, recoil, those different things. I went and tested this in game, and this was by far the best feeling version of the auto. So we got the MX silencer, the ZAC 600mm BFA, 3 to 6x, Anastasia padded. So this hurts your initial firing recoil, but helps your sustained, and gives you some flinch resistance. It feels like that really helps the recoil a lot in combination with tight grip. We got the hand stop for horizontal and vertical. The Automaton has mostly vertical recoil. Like if you go shoot a wall with this thing, you'll see it's like perfectly straight. It's just a perfectly straight line, and that's why it was so popular, I think, specifically with controller players. Mouse and key players can kind of change the direction of their recoil control really quickly, but controller players, just being able to just hold the stick down a certain amount in the exact same position to control that recoil, I think is really powerful. I'm trying to learn controller right now. I'm getting pretty good at it, just so I can help with better recommendations, but that's kind of my view of that currently. I think that's why this gun was so popular among controller players. Pine tar grip, like I said, this gun has mostly straight vertical recoil, so Pine Tar is going to help the most with that vertical recoil. The 75 round drum is just the default magazine that we've always used. The other ones aren't really worth using for this gun. Lengthened, and then tight grip. Like I said, the Anastasia stock with the tight grip perk really helped the recoil. It just felt great. Alright, that caps off the very last Warzone 1 long range meta video. I don't think there's going to be any substantial changes to Warzone 1 after the Season 5 mid-season update. So I just want to take a second and thank you all so much. All of TGD, YouTube, everything has completely changed my life. And I'm really thankful to be where I am, and it's all because of the support you guys give me. So thank you so much for that. We will continue pushing into Warzone 2 and do the absolute best we can to get you guys the most accurate data, the best loadouts, and everything. So thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.